Welcome to this week's episode of Business at Speed. This is Nick Bratton. I'm here with Steve Breitenstein. We are excited to bring you three new topics this week. One on our thoughts on speed training, also my thoughts on some business development. We're going to speak a little bit about what's been going on for my facility that I feel like each of you are going to be able to take a little bit away from, and then also Steve's thoughts on leadership. We are going to do our best to save Steve's voice today as he's just battling through and making sure to bring you guys content every single week. But Steve, in the shortest version that you can, how are things going right now?
Yeah, we're doing pretty solid. I lost my voice. We're recording on a Friday. I lost my voice on Monday. Been battling each day to get my voice good enough to be able to coach through the afternoon. And then by the end of the day, I got nothing left. But I am excited to still be on the podcast today and just kind of talking through some of the ideas that we've discussed. Like in our settings, there's always opportunities for growth and to be challenged. And we have to battle through sicknesses, different things with our families that the facility still needs us. And that's the tough part, I think, as coaches often. We don't always get the credit, I think, for what we actually have to do in order to keep things going sometimes, right? And it's not as easy as I'm just going to take 2 days off from talking and get my voice back. I can't just not coach people for 2 days. There's other things I have to do. I ran staff meetings, everything like that. And I think these moments are always nice to kind of just think about, man, there's a lot of stuff that really needs me to be at my best, for the facility to run its best. And I know the same thing happens for you, Nick. You guys got a lot going on in your space with a new facility soon opening up. There's not an opportunity for you just to sit back and just have a day. So what's the update on kind of what's going on with the new space for you guys?
Yeah, so we are getting very, very close. It turns out we're about a month away now. So for you guys who are unaware, I purchased a facility in December of 2021, and it is 2023, and we are still not in it. So we have dealt with renovations. We've dealt with things with the counties and parishes down here. We are dealing with all kinds of codes and things like that. And we will get into these things here in a little bit. But latest update, we are having our state-of-the-art fire system installed now. We have to have that inspected. Once that is inspected, then we will get the A-OK to get moved in and start training athletes. So it looks like we're about a month away. We will announce that we are moving as soon as we find out that the system has been okayed. And then we will basically give our clients a 2-week lead up. So the inspection is on the 27th. I'm hoping that by April 11th, we will be in there and operating. And I'm also going to be excited to talk to you guys about what we're doing from a marketing standpoint, because we have a massive marketing strategy put together for how we announce the move, how we will be explaining how we go about that, because obviously anytime you move facilities, that affects people's day-to-day, how they get to you, how it fits in their schedule, what the travel time looks like, understanding traffic patterns. And in a city like New Orleans, which, it is very compact, we have to take a lot of things into account. And so how we're marketing that, how we are bringing in partners who are going to work with us. This week we talked in our social media work about the third space. And so we'll talk about how we are creating a third space for our clients there. And so again, I think this new facility is going to create a lot of content for us. It already is. But we are about 30 days out at this point.
Yeah, it's exciting because I know that I've been hearing the process all along the way, and I am excited for you guys as well. So I can't wait for that to happen. I wanted to jump into our first topic as we talk about speed facilities and speed training, of course. This is building off of what we led into in a previous podcast where we were talking about the role of hip flexors in sprinting, which is very much a topic that has been discussed. I know, Nick, you've written a couple articles that have been posted on some different platforms regarding hip flexor training. There's been research that's come out not too recently, but it's been more affirming to say sprinters have a more developed hip flexor psoas than non-sprinters, right? But you made kind of an interesting idea of, are the hip flexors undervalued in change of direction? right? Or are we relying too much to say that it's all about ankles and feet? So I'd love for you to kind of elaborate on that because we were just barely touching on that last time.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. This all started with some work that I was doing specific to hip flexor training as it relates to sprinting, and more specifically, the eccentric control of the hip flexor when you look at backside mechanics, and then reprioritizing that front side position. And so, what I started thinking about is as we're going through our agility training, we spend a lot of time training the ankle complex and trying to make sure that we're moving our feet quickly and we're getting back off the ground. And one of the things that I started thinking about was, are we losing this? Are we missing the forest among the trees here because we're spending so much time at the ankles that we're not actually repositioning the limb the way that the entire limb needs to be repositioned? And so my thought around this is, if I don't have the strength at the hip flexor to rapidly move the limb, and I think that's the key right there, is it's not just moving the limb, it's rapidly moving the limb. I could have very quick reaction at the ankles, but if I can't move the rest of the limb, the ankle is not strong enough to get the entire leg up. You're not going to create any type of reactive force that's going to lift the knee, the thigh, put the hip in the correct position. If anything else, it's going to put your knee in a disadvantageous position, creating some type of varus or valgus reaction. And so one of the things that we are looking specifically at is, when we train the hip flexor, are we training one, hip flexor strength, full range of motion hip flexor strength, but also reactive hip flexor power? And so our ability to quickly get it up and back down into the right position, but also not just necessarily in the sagittal plane. I've got to be able to, one, get that foot up, and if I'm opening my hips or taking a crossover step, I have to have the strength throughout in order to position myself in the right area. So we've been really focusing on things like different strategies with the sled protocol, with our marches and our runs. We've been looking at different strategies with our wall drills. We've been doing some band resistance on our wall drills. We have been incorporating some bungees on the feet when we're going through certain movements. And so it's really just some trial and error right now of trying to figure out how do we in a safe way train this hip flexor in order to help it to get into the right position. I'm going to, just so I don't lose my train of thought, I'm going to pause for just a second here. Our girl is running right now. So I'm going to record this 1/400.
This might be a good clip to share as well.
I already have a video of you and I speaking and watching the track meet at the same time. This is the life of a speed coach.
Yeah,
this
100%.
is it right here.
100%.
Content creation and watching track meets.
A lot of multitasking happening right now.
Yeah. So as we start looking at this hip flexor training and how we help the limb to reposition itself, we don't necessarily want to just look at, how it repositions itself and say the sagittal plane, but even if we're going through our change of direction type work, whether we're opening the hips up or taking a crossover step, it's really all about getting back into the position to create that force. And so, we're going through exercises such as some of our work on the sled with marches and quick high knees, going through some resisted work, doing a wall drill. We like to put an ankle band around the feet when we're going through that wall drill, just to resist that movement. And we'll even use some of our bungees as well, going through some prone and supine exercises in order to, again, work on full range of motion, but also power as we're going through those movements.
Yeah, the point you touched on there that stuck out to me was the idea that it has to be fast enough to kind of mimic what's going on. And we had that discussion as a staff just the other day, was talking about this appears to be weak, quote unquote. I kind of hate using that term because immediately we go weight room mode about, well, how do we strengthen it? And that's been something that I've thought about a lot when they've been citing that these track athletes have bigger hip flexors and they have these hip flexors. And then there's been some people that kind of cherry pick that information. They go, well, here's exercises that really strengthen your hip flexor or target your hip flexor. Well, those sprinters most likely never did that exercise, but their hip flexor developed a certain way, right? And they're like hockey players, their hips have a certain musculature to them from repeatedly doing crossovers and lateral pushes. And it's that that same thing for cyclists. They sometimes get gigantic thighs when all they're doing is just cycling like crazy. But your body responds to that repeated demand. And do sprinters have that large hip flexor just because they're sprinting a lot? And that's a main thing that gets worked. And the better that you do your high knee running and putting volume to that, that gets a lot of work. Or is there a way that we should be doing it more in the weight room to expedite that process for our younger athletes? And that was a lot where our discussion went, but some of those exercises were so slow or so weight driven that it didn't feel like it would really carry over very well. And we were talking about, like, if this was a bodybuilding competition, that probably would be really effective at developing that hip flexor. But it's not with a rhythm. It doesn't have a rapid component to it. There's not really an eccentric, isometric component that you're playing with the stretch shortening cycle. And that was one of our discussion points. It didn't really come to a conclusion, but it was just an idea of being careful sometimes when we diagnose that this is weak. That can mean a lot besides just weight room needs to get stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's almost like thinking about, physical therapy's play in strengthening an area to bring somebody back to being able to step back onto the field. Yes, physical therapy has a place and getting them back to healthy and being able to move and to move well, but that doesn't mean that that's going to prepare them for activity. And the same thing when you compare, say, powerlifting and Olympic lifting. Powerlifting and those movements may be great for building generally strong and powerful athletes. However, that's not going to make a sprinter better at what they do, or just that alone make a basketball player jump any higher. We have to have some of these specialty movements. And so when you talk about the rate of contraction, when you talk about the range of motion of the contraction, that's the other thing that I see is we end up going through these exercises and it doesn't mimic the frequency of the movement. It doesn't mimic the range of motion that it's moving through. It doesn't mimic any of these other things, but because it's the same muscle groups, we just assume that that's going to help us to be better at what we're trying to do. And it's not necessarily the case, especially with the older groups that we're working with.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the pieces of equipment that I feel that I unfortunately have underutilized is the flywheel that we have in our facility. It's not as nice as a K box, but the idea, I was playing with it ever since we had this discussion about, is the hip flexor underutilized and what are some exercises we can do that are a little different, was putting that around an ankle and working that rapid knee flexion to extension pattern or leg swing patterns coming across. I think it's a phenomenal stimulus where the range of motion, you can play with it really easily. You can do the tempo of it. You can change that. There's so many benefits to that piece of a machinery that allow you to have like that freedom of it, where the band creates so much tension at the very end of it, right? That it like almost dangerously can pull you back sometimes. Yeah. But that's something that I really feel like I want to spend more time trying to really dive into what really has good carryover. Because I hate when it's just like, well, that felt good. I need to know this actually improves this. This actually carried over. Now they're moving better because of this movement that we were doing. But I really like that as an exercise stimulus.
Right. Well, and so, if we're talking about this, let's talk a little bit about, assessment of it. One of the things that I've started assessing is when we're working with athletes for the first time, younger athletes, their ability to break down. Non-basketball players, it's amazing how many times we ask them to go into a full speed sprint and then decelerate quickly, and they just shuffle their feet. They're not able to actually bring their foot up and down off the ground. And so, understanding that rapid contraction that happens in a small range of motion. So starting there, we've started incorporating more speed and agility drills where we're focused more on, say, like cone circles or quick feet in a certain area, or coming to a position and staying in almost like a ready state where the feet are chopping, but we're not going anywhere, to see like, are we able to control ourselves? Are we able to get into these positions? Or are we just sloppily kind of going through it? And that's what I end up seeing is, again, I think in basketball, we learn it early on when we start to learn closeouts. But if you're not a basketball player, so for example, our soccer athletes, they tend to really struggle with this. Our soccer athletes come in and we ask them to go through some type of deceleration, and it's just a sliding of the feet on the turf. And so there's no really good efficient deceleration strategies going on. And so we start to look at things like that. And now one of the things that I'm paying a little more attention to as well is when we start introducing our cuts, our crossover steps, our directional steps, do we have good control of when the foot is picked up and placed back on the ground? Because some of that lack of control can be because of a lack of strength. If we don't have the strength in order to get into the position, we're just letting the foot fall where it may. And so it's not a lack of awareness, it's a lack of strength to be able to stay in the position to get all the way around to get the foot back down where we want it to go. And so, using some of these agility drills to get a better idea of, do we have the control to be able to reposition ourselves before we start to expand on any of this agility work or add true agility when we're doing some decision-making drills?
Yeah, I think that idea of the drills really serving as that bridge is so important, where it doesn't have to be that it's a certain amount of reps and sets, but you incorporate some of these drills or these types of actions. And then when you see the desired change in the athlete that's in front of you, you kind of move along a little bit into something a little bit more advanced to say, all right, now the quality of that is good enough that we can move into change of direction. We don't have to stay in that drill for the next 4 or 5 weeks simply because I said it's on the program for 4 or 5 weeks. We want to get into change of direction work. And as soon as you're able to understand the coordination of that, you physically have the quote unquote strength to handle it. Okay, now we can progress along a little bit. And I think that's something that is a challenge when you're trying to scale your program sometimes, when you have multiple coaches running programs, to allow that kind of variability. But that's really what serves our athletes the best.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've gone back and forth a little bit here. We talked about some exercises. We talked about a little bit of assessment.
Yeah.
One other thing that I would bring up is, and I've spoken on this multiple times in my presentations, doing any type of say form running drill for distance, or for time, to really train the specific endurance of what we're doing. Being able to, a lot of times we see individuals who are going through, take for example an A skip or a high knees, 15 or 20 yards. Well, that 15 or 20 yards may not be enough. We may have the strength and the power and the ability to go through it for that short of a period of time. But when I'm doing agility work for 30 minutes, that was not enough to get them prepared for that. And so extending the work that we're going through, whether it's, 30, 50, even 100 yards or meters at a time, in order to improve, again, the special endurance of the area.
I love that. And that was something that we did when we were during COVID. We were outside, and a lot of our athletes had not been training a lot, and they had no base of anything. And so we ended our workouts, our speed portion, with extended marches, skips, high knees. And week after week, we just extended that distance a little bit further and further and further, with rhyme and reason to not overstrain somebody on a day one workout. But we really had no issues with hip flexor strains out on the turf, right? And it's an idea that we talk about regularly in the facility. Our owner, Tommy, when he was with Northwestern football back in the early 2000s, he's like, we did this, but I don't know if it made sense or not. But eventually we worked up to 50 yards of high knee runs where they had to stay with me as I walked alongside of them. And he's like, we built up to that. And he's like, I don't know if I could defend the rhyme and reason necessarily of that. It was something I thought we should do back then. But he's like, I'll tell you what, like, it didn't feel like we had a lot of hip flexor issues.
Right.
And the guys had some great looking hips and thighs, musculature wise. And
Yeah.
he's like, I just feel like there's something to that. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say that that's not even the most extreme that I've heard.
Yeah.
I can't remember what book I was reading this in, but there's a book that talks about Gerard Mach, and the mock drills that he created, and basically they are the form running that we use today. But he would do things like A skips, B skips, high knees, straight leg bounds for 200 or even 400 meters for his sprinters. I mean, 400 meters of high knees.
Man.
And so like when we talk about, but again, it makes sense. Like if I'm
Yeah.
going to sprint a 400 at full speed, or there were track meets where I ran three 400s in a day
Right.
between the 400 open, the 4x4, and the distance medley relay. If I'm going to run 1,200 meters of all out sprint, 400 meters of a high knees really isn't that impactful. And so, it's one of those things that, like anything else, we're building up to. But these are tools that have been used by many coaches throughout the decades.
Yeah. And I think this week, with this conversation in mind, we're going to share out Nick's article on hip flexor training and kind of what the focus is, and love to get a discussion going with coaches about what are those things that we're doing as special bridge exercises that are carrying over well to the field of the track from maybe not necessarily just typical weight room things. But I think that's going to be a really fun conversation we're going to have this week with coaches, as this is a pretty popular topic, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that said, I still think that there are coaches that aren't even thinking about things like this.
Yeah.
And so I think that, one of the things that's become popular lately is spraying ankles. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't give ankles their time and their credit, but at the same time, that's not what's repositioning the entire lower limb. And so we need to be giving a little more credence to the hip flexor and psoas muscle group.
Love that. And I think maybe next time we'll touch on some of the ankle stuff. As we
Yeah,
went over that a little bit, I think we'll actually dive into that next time.
there we
But
go.
I want to move into what Nick teased earlier in the podcast was the updates of the new facility. And what I asked Nick off camera was to describe some of the known obstacles that you have when you're moving into a different space. Because there's a lot of things that you can definitely think through and say, all right, that's going to possibly be an issue. I could see that being a problem. We're going to address that as soon as possible. But then there's also probably a laundry list of items that were not necessarily things that you thought of right away that come up every now and then. And maybe even now you're like, man, this could happen, as I think even deeper into what could possibly happen. And I'd love for any coach that's thinking about changing their location, sometimes going into your first location, having some of Nick's kind of lists of these things to look out for is beyond helpful. So Nick, I'm gonna turn it over to you, let you roll on just a whole list of what's been going on and what coaches should be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think you can divide this into two groups. You can divide it into the groups that are looking to rent another facility, and you can divide it into the groups that are actually looking to purchase another facility. If you're going into rent a facility, anytime we step into a new space, we always look for the big things. Does it have the parking that I require? Does it have the sight lines that I'm looking for? Does it have the space? One thing for me is the linear space. We're going to do a lot of speed work. We need to have a lot of room to run. We think about from a heating and cooling standpoint, does it have what I need? Does it have the office space that I need? But it's the smaller things that we don't necessarily pay attention to. Does the space lend itself to the flow of the facility that I would like? How is the flow going to have to change as far as how they enter, how they move through their workout, how they exit? Does it create any type of log jams there? Another thing that we need to look at is, as you're going through that workout, if your athletes are grabbing water in the middle of the workout, are they going to be walking through other spaces? When people come in for the first time, do you have an area that you can do consultations in? Is that going to be interrupted with something else? Don't put your consultation room on the back side of the rack, because every time somebody puts a weight away on the rack or drops something on the floor, it's going to, throw them off a little bit the first time that they're in there. From an office space standpoint, do you have enough outlets in the facility for what you need to do. And so these aren't big things. They're not things that we necessarily think about the first time we go into a space, because we're visualizing the sexy things, the things that are going to look good. Where's the rack going to go? Where am I going to do my speed and agility stuff? And that's all great, but those aren't the headaches that are going to be created. The headaches are going to be the day-to-day things that really ruin your life. And so those are some of the things that when we're looking at new rental spaces, we're paying attention to is what are the day-to-day headaches like. And one of the things that I'll do is I'll go in and I'll spend a couple of hours and I'll run through basically what my schedule would look like here and just walk through, okay, as I'm opening up. So one of the nightmares in our facility currently is how we open up. We have about 7 different locations that we have to go to for light switches. We have 3 different locations we have to go to for fans. And so we have to cover the entire facility in order to get this thing opened up and shut down. Whereas our new facility is the exact opposite. We have one spot where all the lights, all the fans turn on, and it's right inside the door, and it's right at the bottom of the stairs to our coach's office. That's the other thing that I would take into account as well. Where is your coach's office going to go? As someone whose coach's office currently is right next to the front door, I'll never do this again. And so now intentionally, our coach's office is on the second floor on the opposite side of the building is where everybody enters. And everybody with good intention pokes their head in and says hello. But when I have 7 different 15-minute hello conversations every day, I'm the one that loses 2.5 hours out of my day. And so, thinking through things like that. Now, when you look into purchasing a facility, it gets infinitely harder. And this is one of the reasons why it has taken us 15 months to get into a facility that we purchased. So obviously, anytime that you're buying a building, something of this size, something of this magnitude, the city's going to have its say. The facility that we're moving into, it hasn't been touched by the city in almost 50 years. And so there are codes that have changed. Everything has to be brought up to code. The city that we're moving into is going through a beautification project. And so I have to have all of my trees, all of my bushes, I have to have my mulch approved. And so all of that has to be taken care of. All of your signage has to be approved by somebody. And so you deal with that, but also what your building has to fit into what the city wants in that space. There are some businesses that they just don't want in their incorporation. And so it really takes having somebody by your side that's been through this process, that knows who to work with, who to talk to as you're going through these things. But then again, as far as the day-to-day goes, as you're moving in there, what do you want it to feel like? What do you want it to feel like for yourself? What do you want it to feel like for your staff? What do you want it to feel like for the athletes? What can you put in that are little conveniences that help out? What are some things that you can put in, and where do you place them that kind of jump out to people? So one of the things that's going to be big for us is, hanging all of our college signs as soon as you walk in the door. So it's one of the first things that you see. Some of the technology pieces that we use as far as heart rate monitors, velocity-based training work, the physical therapists that we work with use force plates. And so having those things placed intentionally toward the front of the facility. So those are some of the things that you are going to notice right away. Having a welcoming entrance. So, an area where they can have to themselves. And so again, it's all about creating this feel, but each of these things creates a headache as well. You don't want to over busy it, but at the same time, you need to have access to the things like we talked about, power in those areas that's crucial. And so again, I think that the biggest thing that this comes down to, whether you're renting a space or looking to purchase a space, is spending a lot of time in there visually or mentally visualizing what it's going to look like every day when you walk in and when you leave, putting yourself in your client's shoes. What does it look like for them every day when they walk in and when they leave? What is the feel that it is creating? And it should be something that's exciting for both parties to be a part of.
I know one thing that you touched on right there that has been an issue for us recently was the idea of outlets and how do we charge all of our equipment that we have in the facility, which is a ton of different timing systems, gym awares, Swift jump mats. All these things need to be charged regularly, and there's just no real good way to do it. And so the office becomes like this huge hodgepodge, and we're constantly like, we need to find a better solution for this. And
Yeah.
if we're looking for another space, that's definitely what I'm going to be talking about during one of our walkthroughs is where are we going to be setting our stuff up to charge? Is it going to
Yeah.
be safe? Are the outlets safe enough that we can plug in a lot of voltage into these? We also have like Normatec boots. We have iPads. We have like, there are like probably 25 items that are plugged in charging at the end of the night, at least on top of
Yes.
just computers. And those are things that I never would have thought about until we're in the thick of it.
Right. Well, so here's the other piece too, Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you in the space that we're in, our upload speed is horrendous.
Yeah.
And, with the amount of social media work that you and I both do, it takes forever in order to get anything put up, whether it's a video that we're uploading onto social media, whether it's, a Zoom call that we're doing. Again, I'm a professor for Tulane University. I do a lot of my classes from my office. And so, I have to have a strong signal in order to be able to do all the things that I do. And one of the things that actually the first thing that we did when we started doing our renovation was put the best Wi-Fi in there that we could, because we knew that, the amount of social media that we were going to do was only going to increase, and the things that we were going to offer were only going to increase, both as far as like what we're offering in the facility, but what we're going to start offering online as well, as far as classes and courses and different things like that. And so, we have to have something that's strong enough to carry all of those things.
Without a doubt. And I think I'm excited to hear part two of this after you guys move in. And there'll be still more things, which is a never ending process of being that small business owner, being that facility owner, is no matter how many spaces you open up, there's always new things that you want to get even better at and clean up. And that's what makes it really, really special when you've done it a few times, is you can really dial in a really good process and create a good checklist. But I appreciate Nick, as always, sharing some of those insights into what it takes to really navigate these changes to what your setting is.
Yeah. Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. So, Steve, I know for our leadership segment today, to wrap this up, we're going to talk a little bit about trust and how we maintain trust in a relationship. And this is so crucial for what we do, both for working with the individuals that work with us, for working with parents. We're asking for a lot of trust from our parents. They bring their athletes into us a number of times per week and hand over their credit card and trust that we're going to help them get to their goals. For our athletes, we ask them to do things that they may or may not have been bought into at that point. And so, when we talk about the relationships that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, how do we go about creating this trust, maintaining this trust, and really just navigating these relationships?
Yeah, it's a very daunting task at times, is to make sure that you're creating the best relationships you can. The fallback where trust falls short often is that we create relationships that are transactionally based trust situations where they train with me. I know they'll do a good session. They leave. They trusted that. But we as professionals need more than that. We need a better, deeper relationship with them in order for them to really trust the whole process of what's going on. And that's that catchy tagline, right? That was, I think, are the 76ers finally out of that tagline, or are they still in the trust the process mode? Just believe it. And that the next question that comes up with trust the process is, whose process are we trusting? Like, do we know this is the best process possible? And I've been talking to an owner of a different company out in the East Coast. And one of their missions is that we want to go beyond the clinic or in our space, beyond the facility with our relationships. And we want to treat our relationships like family, right? And we want to make sure that we are a place that offers answers, solutions to problems that might not be specific to our expertise, but they trust us so much that they at least come to us. Nick, for you, how many times injured athletes come to you asking what they should do next before they've even gone to the doctor.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, I had two last night.
and that means a lot. Like if you're not a coach and you've never had that happen, like it's a pretty cool thing that someone trusts you enough that they're injured and they're like, hey, what should I do next? And you're like, did you see a doctor? Like, no, we asked you first. They're like, well, I appreciate the fact that you believe I have enough guidance for you and you trust me enough that whatever I'm going to say you're going to do, but you need to go see a doctor right now. Like this is beyond me. But I think that's a really good barometric for that, right? Is like how often are people coming to me with things that maybe aren't just about speed training? And that's where my relationship now is taking to the next level. And that skill set to build that relationship on the front end is showing your commitment to that person that's in front of you and to listen to what they're actually saying. We in this field, we're all salesmen to a degree. We're constantly selling ourselves, but we all have been in the situation where a salesperson is just talking over you and they're just hyping up themselves or they're hyping up their product. And in the back of your head, you're like, just let me tell you my problem and then let me know if you can solve it or not. And we get in that same position sometimes where we will just coach at people about speed development, but we're not actually listening to what their problem is. We might very well have the solution. Very most likely we have the solution or the answer, or we know where the solution is, but we didn't listen well enough. And automatically that trust is fractured from the very jump. And that is something that's so powerful. And Nick, what inspired this segment really was when you were talking about those new potential hires. That's a situation where you're saying, hey, I'm going to ask you to trust me and I'm trying to trust you in this situation.
Mhm.
And there's a lot that has to go on. And when you were describing that process, a lot of it came back to having discussions and listening and hearing what they really want next, hearing what they want to do in Bratton sports performance. What do they want to have happen there? And by listening, you're able to actually build a relationship with them. And that's where we miss it often from the very first interaction is we're not having that lens of I need to listen to build this relationship. And then the trust just becomes transaction.
Yeah, and I think that it becomes harder and harder too the longer that you do this because we as coaches, we as people feel like, okay, well, I have this experience. You need to just rely on the fact that I have this experience, whether it's athletes that you're working with, whether it's someone who's asking for advice, whether it's somebody that, is joining the company. It's I've done this before. Just trust that I know what's going on. And it's unfair. It's unfair to ask that because this is their life. This is their athlete. This is their athletic career. This is their professional career. It's not enough to say, well, just trust me. This is a team thing. You need to be working together. It's not a I'll lead, you follow. I'll let you know when we're there. It's a hey, let's work together as we go through this so that one, you have ownership of this process and that as we go through this process, I can continue to build your trust because you see what these steps look like. And ultimately one day you can continue the process on your own and you can lead somebody else through it because you had ownership of it yourself.
I love that. And that's the hardest thing sometimes is that initial moment when you say, just trust me, I'll take care of it all. And when that doesn't happen, I think you've seen that with a lot of coaches, maybe some of your old school coaches, right? Where immediately that's conflict. Well, someone says, why? But why should I do that? Why should I listen to what you're saying? Why should I program? And you take that stance of authority instead of leaning in to say, tell me more. Like why what are you not understanding? What's giving you apprehension? What are you unsure about from what we just described that we're going to try to do? And I think it's an important thing because we ask it and we need it from our clients, we need it from our coworkers, we need it from our subordinates and the people maybe we're leading up from, potential partners outside the building, our spouses, our friends. Like it's just a never ending cycle and it can go so long to really have that intentionality on the front end of all those interactions to come into it listening, critically listening, and following up with action that reflects what you guys said you were going to do. That's that next level to it, right? Is if you're saying one thing and doing a different thing, you will destroy trust immediately. That will absolutely destroy it. There's a huge piece to when you say something, you follow up on it, people immediately start to put more belief into everything you say then. And so those are the two pieces for me when we talk about what makes it more than just a transactional piece to say, I want you to get me faster, you got me faster, or I trust you can get me faster. And when you're trying to make it bigger than that, listen on the front end and stay true to what you say you're going to do on the back end will quickly build some more powerfully trusted relationships.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. I think it's great. Well, Steve, again, always love this time being able to sit down, talk about some things that we have going on. For our listeners, a couple of things. One, be sure that you're following along with all of our social media work, both on Instagram and on Twitter. There's a lot of content that we're putting out every week, at least 3 or 4 posts. We're recapping a lot of our previous episodes. We've had a lot of really good conversation going on Twitter on some of the questions that we've been asking. And like Steve alluded to, we'll have an article coming out this week. And so lots of things going on. Be sure to stay engaged. As always, please take a minute and just give us a rating, give us a review. That helps us, and share this with another coach who you think would take something from it, whether they are thinking about starting a business, they've already started a business and they're trying to navigate it, a young coach who is in their own weight room for the first time, and just looking for a little bit of guidance. Please share this out. We would really appreciate it. Steve, I appreciate your time and look forward to the next one.